I used to think that I was brave. In the summer, I'd go out with the boys and take charge of our little expeditions into the forests around our little town, pretending that we were archaeologists uncovering lost tombs and fighting off mummies or mutant vampire bats. And by the time I'd reached 12, there wasn't a tree I hadn't climbed or a boy in school I hadn't tussled with. I'd always come back with a scraped knee or a skinned elbow, with dirt and grass stains on my sneakers and burrs stuck to the hems of my jeans, and my mom and dad would just roll their eyes and smile because I was just so precious. I'm pretty sure I was the only girl in my class who didn't scream when Ben Howlitz brought one of his dad's tarantula specimens in for show and tell. I mean, the thing was dead and behind glass. I was always first to take a dare, too. Couldn't stand the thought of someone thinking that I was just some girly girl because I wouldn't climb the water tower or walk through the graveyard at midnight and touch the statue that was supposed to kill you if you did. I didn't tell my parents about those things unless I actually got hurt. I think I had to go to the hospital like 4 times before elementary school was finished. They were always pissed, but I just bide my time until I could start up again. I kept on like that, with fear and guilt in my periphery until the second year of middle school. We were in Miss Newman's English class. It was July, and we were reading The Turn of the Screw. And about halfway through, we got bored and started talking about ghost stories. Miss Newman talked about the Victorian tradition of reading a ghost story on Christmas Eve. She asked us if we know any ghost stories. Someone brought up Casper, and we all made fun of him for reading kid stuff. One of the girls whose parents were laxer brought up some R-rated movie she'd seen. Terry Lishstone brought up M.R. James because of course she did. And then Lee Howards, who was one of my closest friends, asked if we know the story of the McKenna house. He says it like he's winding up to give us all the juicy details, eyes narrowed, his lips starting to quirk up into a smirk because his dad patrols around there a lot and he thinks he can give us all nightmares. And Miss Newman shuts him down. She didn't yell. She rarely had to. She just snapped her head around, looked at him down her bony beak of a nose and said, "No. We will not be talking about that house in this classroom. Do you understand?" Lee did. Of course he did. And he shut up. Most of us were scared of Miss Newman. With her dark eyes, pointy nose, gray hair, and thin fingers. She just had this classically stern, unlikable teacher air about her. Like the villain in a story about magic orphans or fairy gardens. And she loathed that house with a passion. She lived close to it, actually, in one of 3 houses at the bottom of the hill it sat on. We figured she'd probably been there and seen it all go down. I asked her once, right in front of everyone. I'd never even considered the fact that someone would be furious without raising their voice, but the way she said, "It's all stories, now get back to your seat." And the way that she looked at me while she said it, with her dark eyes punching holes through me, making me feel like she was about to slap me. She scared me. She was the only adult that I'd met who could really make me feel small and stupid and, well, childish. And I hated her for it. I made her my nemesis because a kid like me had to have one, even though I doubt she ever really gave me much of a second thought outside of school. Still, I was fed up with her attitude, and I saw my chance to have some fun, so after class had ended, I cornered Lee and asked him, well, I told him, actually, that we were going to go and check out the house. His eyes lit up and he smiled, this big mischievous smirk, and he said, "Hell yeah, I'm in." Of course, I dragged Grady into it too. Grady was my brother, and our relationship was a mess, to put it lightly. Back then I was so full of fire, and he wasn't. He wasn't a risk taker like I was. He was sort of an island. Someone who sat on the sidelines and read or built models or watched the Muppet Show. He didn't live like I did. And back then, I thought that meant that he didn't live, period. I was so obsessed with being strong and tough. And to me, he was just weak. So I bullied him. I told myself that I was just toughening him up, getting a rise out of him, getting him mad, getting him to take risks. I knew better. I knew he was just shy and sensitive. But I kept going. It's a wonder he didn't hate me. Maybe he did. I don't know. Sometimes when it's late and I can't get to sleep, I tell myself that he did over and over until I get too fed up to do anything but sleep. So yeah, I dragged him into it. Cornered him after school, put my arm around his shoulders, laid it on real thick, the whole thing. He actually put up a fight, which was pretty surprising to me. He went on about how, despite what some people said, not many people actually knew what had happened up there. So there could have been traps or super old, broken drug paraphernalia waiting to stick us if we touched the wrong thing in the dark. Or druggy squatters. And who knew what they might do? He even finished it off by saying, and if the floor breaks and I break my leg, then you'll get in so much trouble. Looking back, he was actually pretty convincing, but I was way too fired up to let anyone sway me. I just rushed ahead, told him to stuff it, or something like that we were going, and that it would be good for him, all that crap. And he wilted under me. I didn't care. I wanted to stick it to Miss Newman and my parents and every other well-meaning adult and condescending teen that had ever told me to stay away. And the years of hearing the story had sort of desensitized me in a way, and also hyped me up to see if the story was true. It went like this, give or take. The McKennas were a wealthy family from New York who bought the land in 1976, and by 78, they had a house built and moved in. The husband's name was Jared, and the wife was Sandra. They were both quiet, reserved people. Jared was short and fat and rarely left his wife's side. Sandra was tall, sad-eyed, and her skin was the color of bread dough. They were charitable, kind to anyone who met them on their lonely evening walks by the lake, or when they worked themselves up enough to go out to eat, but they were fragile, not normal, especially Sandra, who kept showing up at school plays and talent shows, but couldn't ever stay till the end before she had to leave in tears, and who sometimes caught children by the arm and stared at them with wet, dull eyes until they pulled themselves away and ran. Acting like that, it's not surprised that rumors started spreading. The adults whispered that she'd been in and out of asylums her whole life, that she'd smothered her baby during an episode of postpartum psychosis. The kids told each other that she was a child snatcher or a witch, looking for her next meal, or maybe even a pedophile, scooping out the choicest kid in town. A lady my mom knew from church bumped into Jared one evening, walking from the town's antique store. He'd stumbled, and the thing he'd been carrying fell out of his hands. My mom's friend, being a decent person, went to pick it up and saw the cover of what was definitely a book on the occult. She never told Mom what the cover picture was exactly. All she said was that it was vulgar and utterly horrid. Eventually, as the rumors grew and people started getting colder towards them, the McKennas stopped leaving their house. Eventually, without any new incidents to stoke the fire, the talk turned towards newer things to be upset about, and the McKennas sort of slipped into ghost story by flashlight territory. And that's where they stayed. And then, One blue-gray night in July, when the air was thick with gnats and the wind was cool, the police got a call from Jared. He was in tears, begging them to come quickly. "Something's happened to my wife," he said. "It all went wrong. Everything's wrong. She's dying. You have to help us." And so they do. 3 or 4 cop cars go squealing off into the night, up the dirt road on the fringes of town, and to the McKenna's quaint little house. When they get there, they can hear screaming and sobbing from inside the foyer. And when they bust down the door, they find Jared in the process of dragging his wife's body across the floor. She's white, turning yellow from the blood loss. One leg is hanging on by a nerve cluster, nearly torn off at the thigh. And her belly and privates are mauled. It takes a proper autopsy for them to see that some parts of her are missing. Of course, they arrest Jared. The man's a babbling, drooling, screaming wreck who can only say, "I'm sorry, Sandra." And the cops find a museum's worth of occult stuff all throughout the place. So it's not too much of a stretch to say that he went and killed his wife as part of some dark ritual. After everything, the house was left to rot. But some people say that on clear, blue, quiet nights, when the wind is cool and the gnats are flitting, you can hear Sandra's ghost staggering to and fro inside, calling for her husband to come join her. Obviously, there were elements that kept changing. Sometimes her body was headless. Other times, she'd be the one dragging him. The one that was most common when I was growing up was that the police found the two of them alive, wrapped in bloody robes and standing over a baby or a kid that they just made a meal of. I've spent a long time going over what I can in the way of evidence. I have a theory that I'm pretty sure of, but I'm gonna leave it till the end. I want to go over what happened to us before I lose my nerve. And if I think I'm fine after, then I'll tell you. Back then, I heard about all those awful, gruesome things, and although I did have nightmares, I still felt this giddiness at the idea of going there, or delving into the unknown like an old-timey pulp hero. What better place to test myself, right? So we snuck out at 11 because I thought it'd be cool to explore the haunted house at midnight. We brought our backpacks stuffed full of horror comics and candy, Halloween in July, flashlights, and my little flip phone. The house was at the opposite side of town, down a lonely little dirt drive walled in by the woods. Grady had brought our dad's Kodak, which was pretty much his anyway, and by the time we'd gotten there, he'd taken about a dozen pictures. When I asked him why, he sort of stuck his nose in the air and said, "Because it looks pretty at night, and I want to enjoy it." I said something swarmy back to him, and then I pushed him. He got up and shoved me, and then we were racing the rest of the way. He was so quick. He always has been. In the end, I had to trip him up as he made it into the driveway of the house, and then I twisted his arm behind his back until his laughter stopped and the begging started. I was such a creep. Probably smiled when I did it. Things were quiet for a bit afterwards. Lee called to say that he was on his way, so that gave us some time to look around the outside of the place. I'd been hearing stories about the place since I was little. Our town was big, with forests on all sides and tall mountains, and a nice blue lake. And there are dozens of weird places you can still visit. The old rectory, the museum, the biggest library in the county, the abandoned wharf out by the lake, little stone circle near the hiking trail. But those places were all charming, you know? Quaint, like an old Halloween die cut or a Ray Bradbury story. Places that our parents approved of. Places where tourists went. Places that had a history that you could make family-friendly. That wouldn't taint our little child brains and turn us into witches or drug dealers or whatever. The McKenna house wasn't like that. The adults didn't like talking about it. If I asked them, they'd just say it wasn't a place for little girls to go playing in. And if I nagged them enough, they'd get antsy or angry, and they'd tell me to go find some other place to horse around at. Or sometimes they'd crouch down, look me dead in the eye, and say something like, "Some very bad things happened up there, okay? Some very bad things." In their serious voices, as if we'd figured that out. And they'd leave it at that, like saying that wouldn't make me and every other bored tween and teen want to go have a look. And people did go have a look. But nobody ever went in. At least, not farther than the mudroom, which had a closed door at the other end of it. And I don't think that counted. Not that I'd actually seen it, outside of a few pictures. After someone a few classes above me tried to break a window, the place ended up being patrolled by one of the policemen, usually one that looked suitably scary to a kid. Probably picked like that on purpose. Stuff that got taken from the house was like a good luck charm or a priceless museum piece. Toby Nash had a boot that he'd taken from the mudroom, and he treated that disgusting thing like a Picasso painting or something. So, with all that said, when I actually saw the place, it lived up to my expectations. It was a tall, thin house covered in narrow windows, almost like the kind medieval soldiers would fire crossbows through. The top was all green gables that were as straight and sharp as knife tips, with a few old brick chimneys sticking out here and there. There was an awning going around the whole place, between the first and the second floors, and everything, except the shutters and the roof, were painted in this light blue, like the kind of blue that you see in nurseries. I remember the last rays of the sun bouncing off the dark glass and the cotton candy inferno of the evening sky overhead, and thinking, it looks like a fairy tale house. And yeah, it did. But it was more like a fairy tale house a long time after the happily ever after, when the prince and princess had moved away to bigger and better things and left their little cottage behind to rot in the enchanted forest. Grady was actually the one who got over it first. It was the clicking of his camera that snapped me out of it. I remember being glad he was too fixated on the house to see the expression that had been on my face, or even if it was, for only a moment. We followed this half-wrecked stone pathway through a tangled mess of a garden that led all the way up to the little front porch. Grady snatching the Polaroids that fell from his camera all the while. There wasn't any graffiti, but I could see a few places where some people had dug out a chip of wood from the already gouged up front porch. The door itself was really scratched up too, but the knob still worked, and it wasn't locked or bolted. I said something like, "We should just go in. Maybe we can hide and scare Lee when he comes by." And I didn't mean a word of it. Grady gave me a look. He was really good at mimicking our parents' facial expressions, but they never worked on me. It was hard to take someone smaller and slighter than you seriously, especially when you've seen them cry. When you've made them cry. Still, that time I relented. Some little need in my mind told me to not go in without someone else with me. Lee was bigger than Grady by a fair margin. He played a lot of sports, and I knew that he'd bring a baseball bat or something with him because he always did that whenever we explored a new place. So we did some looking while we waited. It ended up being only about 5 minutes, but Grady got a bunch of shots of the actual house while I took a look at the garden. If you didn't look at it, and I mean, really look at it, if you just let your brain file it away under part of the house, then you wouldn't notice all the little details. Like the doughy white clusters of fungus sprouting up everywhere, even on the flowers. Or how the roses weren't roses because they were too tall. They had big bloated bulbs that weren't the right kind of red. And their thorns were too long and black. Or the bird bath that was half sunken into the ground and all tangled with ivy. But you could still see that there was a carving of a naked woman with a hummingbird head, holding the pincers of a giant scorpion with a man's head. I bet Lee would have thought some of that stuff was cool. And maybe it sounds cool to you. But there, in all that stillness, with the humidity weighing everything down and the shadows growing out from the grass and the trees, it really wasn't. Eventually, Lee came panting and gasping up the trail. Grady asked him if he was okay. I gave him crap for being late, and then it was time. I didn't really wait to open it, I just did. I knew that I'd look scared if I hesitated. I knew in some deeper way that I'd just give up and walk away if I let myself think about it too much. I had to be the strong one, the personal ethos of a tomboy tween. God help me. The door was heavy, and it didn't make a sound when it swung in. The air that came from inside was cold, dusty, and damp. It was dark, but we'd brought some pretty powerful flashlights. The door opened up into the mudroom, which wasn't much to look at, just a bunch of crusty waders and old boots. One pair of which was missing a shoe, a really moldy rug, and another door. I got this overwhelming sinking feeling when I saw that door. This understanding that we were about to go somewhere real, for lack of a better word. There hadn't been another place in town that was off limits to us, and now we were someplace that was actually forbidden to us, someplace even the adults didn't go. We all knew, at least I think we did, that we'd get in more trouble than we'd ever been in if we got caught, or if anyone found out later. It should have been exhilarating, but it made my stomach turn. Still, I made myself take the first step. I brought a few things with me, some wires, a hammer, a screwdriver, and a skeleton key that my dad kept in his junk drawer. Obviously, none of us knew how to pick a lock, but I was ready to try something if I had to. But there was no need, because there was a key in the lock. A little silver key with a big purple tassel that was so grimy and dusty, it looked like some kind of mummified dead spider. Toby hadn't even mentioned a key. None of the older kids did. I told Lee and Grady about it, went on about what total lying wimps the other people must have been as I reached out, and I turned it. There was this deep, resonant click that I could hear echoing out through the walls and into the depths of the house, and the thing popped open like it was on springs or something. And this rush of cold, musty air hit us like the house had let go of a breath it had been holding in. I remember how we all gasped at the sound. Lee whistled, or he tried to, and Grady reached out to take my hand, then he stopped. He just hugged himself. I was glad he kept his hands to himself, because mine had gone wet and clammy in what felt like a second. We all went in single file. The sounds of crickets, the wind in the trees gave way to the creaks and groans of the house, and what I thought was the scratching of mice in the walls. The foyer looked like a smaller version of one of those old plantation mansions with thin white pillars, marble floors, 2 doorways leading off to other wings, and a big, tall staircase going up to the 2nd floor. We argued a bit over what to do. Lee wanted to go upstairs. I wanted to find the nearest room so I could snag something and leave. But Grady, in a moment of bravery that totally caught me by surprise, said that it'd be better if we went through all the rooms, starting from the bottom. We'd be legends. Hometown heroes like Tom Sawyer or something. We'd have pictures to prove it too. The older kids stopped looking at us like we were babies, and the kids our age would worship the ground we walked on. He looked like he was falling into a daydream while he laid it out for us. It made sense. A bullied kid might go pretty far to get at least a little respite from everything. At least outside of home. We went left first. The echoing marble gave way to creaky old wood. Proper floors for a haunted house, right? Our flashlight beams pooled on the ground like a little boat, big dark sea full of shadowy little islands that you could just barely make out. I'd hoped to find old blood or a tape outline maybe, something, but all I saw was dust and shadows. We ended up in the living room first, and by my thinking at the time, all my worries that the house was going to leave us cold faded away. It was a big room, but there was so much clutter that it looked smaller. There were a couple of chairs that had sheets on them and a ratty, overstuffed couch that didn't. A little fireplace, another door at the far end of the room, stacks of paperbacks and newspapers, charts and folders, and babies. Not real ones, just figures, statues. But that didn't really make me less creeped out. There were hundreds of them sitting on the tops of the stacks, cluttering the coffee tables, lines in front of the books on the bookshelf, boys and girls of every race from every period, plastic, dollar store looking crap and antiques, realistic, cartoony. It gave me a thrill. Grady started taking pictures pretty much immediately. Lee went to the stacks and I went to the bookshelves. For a few rows, it was all romance and stuff about color theory and architecture. But it didn't take long for the selection to change. It went from To Sir with Love and The Art of Color to The Expectant Mother in Motherhood 101. The last bookcase was empty. We looked through the rest of the place, but there wasn't anything else to interest us. I pocketed a baby figure that I thought was the creepiest out of them, a big-headed, big-lipped thing with glass eyes. Lee swiped an old magazine without looking at it, and Grady took more pictures. Then we went for the door past the fireplace. The hallway behind it was cramped, full of boxes and other things under yellowing sheets. The wallpaper was torn all to hell, and there were holes punched in the drywall with bits of stuff scattered around the floor. There were 2 doors on either side, so I took the left-handed one and Lee took the right. Grady's interest was forced on the holes in the wall, and he was taking pictures of the insides of them, so he stayed behind. The room I'd chosen ended up being completely empty, just my luck. So I waited a few seconds because I didn't want to seem like I'd picked a dud room, and then went over to see if Lee had found anything. I'd taken 2 steps when I heard Grady gasp. I ran out and found him with his back pressed against the wall away from where he'd been. His eyes were wide and the camera was shaking in his hands. He was staring at the largest hole in the wall, and I knew he must have seen something before he'd even said it. He told me that he'd seen what he thought were a bunch of big, fat maggots writhing around a green ball, and that he'd even snapped a photo. Problem was, his hands had been shaking too much, and the thing had fallen into the hole. I humored him, shining my light inside, and even poked my head in a ways. No maggots. No green ball. No photo. Just slick wood and a few wisps of fiberglass. Admittedly, I didn't linger. I thought that it was just a cramped little alcove between the joists. But it was actually a lot bigger than that. I could reach out my hand and only barely graze the sheathed insides. It was like a thin, dark, extra hallway that had been walked over. The air in there was damp, like the guts of the house had taken a bit of every storm that it had ever weathered and kept it in. It was cold, too, way colder than the rest of the house. And when my fingertips touched the sheathing, it came away slimy, like I'd picked up a slug, and with a few extra splinters. After I'd taken my hand out of there, I made sure to give Grady my best unimpressed mom look. He wasn't the only one who could do that, before I went to go check on Lee. After that, we went back to the foyer and checked the door on the right. It was the kitchen, and the only interesting things we found in there were a pan roast that was so old it had ossified, and a cookbook with recipes to encourage male fertility, which made Lee and I giggle like morons for a good minute. From there, it was on to the second floor. The stairs leading up groaned every few seconds. Grady asked us if we could please go single file and go slowly. We did, though I teased him a little about it. The upstairs felt different. When we got to it, kind of cold but humid, the air there stuck to my lungs, and I broke out in a cold sweat before I knew it. Poor Grady had to make a go for his inhaler a minute in, and Lee started coughing like he had consumption. It stank, too. I've been an EMT for about 5 years now, and in my opinion, there's two kinds of smells. The gut-churningly bad acute kinds, like when a person has a seizure and loses control of their bowels. And the creeping chronic kind of smell. Like in a burn ward, or the ICU, places that have a smell and then an undersmell. Something that all the antiseptic and industrial bleach can't totally wipe away. It's the kind of smell that's... what's the word? It insinuates itself, creeps up on you, and tickles your brain until you realize what it is. And then you can't stop noticing it. That's what the whole upstairs of the McKenna house smelled like something curdling, fermenting, growing just on the edge of notice. No wonder we all started feeling so sick. The actual layout of the upstairs was odd. 2 long hallways on either side, and the left had 2 rooms. The right looked like it had only 1, but I couldn't tell, so I decided we saved that one for last. The first room we went in turned out to be the bathroom. It looked like you'd imagine. The second was the bedroom, shag carpeting that had gone ratty with time, a big nightstand covered in picture albums, a few bottles of prescription antidepressants, a closet without a door, and a king-size bed that had had all its covers and sheets taken off. There was a big duvet on one side, and on the wall right next to it was this big gash in the drywall that was taller than me and nearly as wide. My brother went over and started taking pictures, though he had to come back after a minute because the smell was making him queasy. Lee actually wanted to go in and see where it went, but I told him he was too fat to fit, and Grady butted in before we started to fist fight in the haunted house, and told him that he saw lots of rusty nails sticking out everywhere, which wasn't true. I felt Lee's eyes burning into the back of my neck while we moved on to the second room, but I knew he wouldn't try anything until later, if he did at all. I mean, he just took my brother at his word, and he didn't usually do that, so maybe he was just trying to sound macho and waiting for us to, I don't know, give him permission to let it go, if that makes any sense. Normally, if that kind of tension broke out between us, we'd snipe back and forth and maybe get in a proper fight, but we'd been marinating in the atmosphere of this damn house for about a half an hour, and we kept starting to talk and then second-guessing ourselves before the words came out. So we stood there in awkward silence until Grady asked if we were going back. Obviously, I heard the words more than the actual worried tone and took it for a jibe, so I scoffed and told him that we had 1 more room left and then maybe we could leave. We got halfway down the right hall when Lee got his revenge by jostling me. I stumbled, reaching out and put a hand on the wall to steady myself. My palm hit a doorknob. It's hard to describe the feeling that came over me when I actually turned and looked where I put my hand. It was like looking at a page in a book when you're beyond tired. My vision got all splotchy, and I felt this greasy feeling in my gut. I blinked and all I could see was plaster and mold, and then I blinked again and there was a door. And then whatever it was went away. My hand was on the knob and I could taste chalk in the air. Looking back on it, it should have been obvious what had happened, but I think I legitimately thought that it had been a trick of the light, or my mind being addled from the awful stink and the dust. I bet you anything that if I had actually looked before I tried to open the door, Lee and Grady would have started staring at me in the wall with slack jaws and buggy eyes. It was locked, so I took out the crowbar and I broke it open. The room turned out to be the study. And it was quiet. Not a thing moving there, no rats in the walls, just the creaking of the floors and the whistling of the wind outside. That's how it seemed, at least. It was a big room with pictures on every inch of wall by cheap-looking bookshelves filled to capacity, a gouged-up and ransacked desk, a few bins, a clawfoot bathtub that wasn't hooked up to anything and looked old enough to be in a museum, and 2 statues. One short, one very tall, both under sheets. I bet you that if we looked at the floor, we'd have seen the marks in the dust around the taller statue. Or at least we'd have noticed how that one wasn't fuzzy with cobwebs like the others. Instead, we were distracted by everything else. At some point in time, there'd been a long folding table like the kind that they have for book fairs on the far wall. But time and the weight of all the crap on it had been too much for the cheap-ass legs, so it had fallen on one side and dumped everything across the floor. The pictures weren't good things for kids to be looking at, not at all. A circle of men standing around a smiling woman whose belly had bloomed like an orchid to show the grinning baby inside. A very detailed female anatomical chart that looked like it'd been made in Victorian times. A giant hermaphroditic thing with 2 heads. Things like that. I think Grady was the only one of us who wasn't creeped out by those things. He took a picture of most of them, I think. You can check them out later yourself. Aside from them, there were periodic tables, star charts, Norman Rockwell postcards, and sketches of children and babies in sunny meadows or strollers or whatever the hell else. Photocopies of old medieval tapestries. Suns with people's faces. It felt like finding that secret room in a serial killer's house with all the pictures and the newspapers. There were books too, stuff like The Female Body, Inside and Out, or From Clay, Life. Some of them were so old that they were actually growing mold. Some of them were in Japanese or German or some other language. Some of them didn't even have titles or authors. It was Grady who figured out what we were looking at. I wasn't much of a reader, much less a fantasy reader. He looked around for a few moments, brows furrowed just like our mom when she was editing her latest design, before his eyes widened and he said in the same tone that he had when we took him to see the whales at SeaWorld, "I think this is an alchemist lab." I had no idea what he was talking about, but I pretended like I did anyway, so I didn't have to hear him wind himself up into a rant. It didn't matter to me, or at least not at the time. He went off, snapping picture after picture, until his satchel was full and he had to hand it off to me. I actually took them without messing with them. I mean, the more proof we had, the less the other kids could naysay us, right? Lee was at the back of the room looking at a weird lab setup that looked like it was entirely made of glass. He was looking at his reflection in the beakers and snickering to himself, which meant that I had nothing else to do but poke around a bit more. Eventually my eyes landed on a little wooden chair that had 2 books stacked on the seat. Pretty as can be. One thick and water-stained, one on top only a step above being a pamphlet. The New Age of Insemination, or How the Great Work May Gift the Barren, and Sow Your Seed in Fallow Ground. I didn't know what the word on the first one meant, so my attention got snagged by the other one, and before I'd even really thought about it, I'd taken it. It was a thin book with this really awful lithograph cover of a woman in pilgrim clothes, kneeling in a field full of babies' arms, all swaying in the wind like stalks of grain. It was really dog-eared, full of bookmarks. It had lots of writing in it, red, blue pen going over every sentence until it looked like a weird 3D eye trick puzzle. It's been years, but I've never been able to find out anything about it. Who published it? Who wrote it? It has virtually no online presence, except for a few people on a couple of forums that I'd visited who have a copy or saw it somewhere. Bet you anything the other books in there are all like that too. Antiques that only alchemists, real practicing ones, not strip mall spiritualists, would know about. Regardless, the place was too much for me. I'd found my limits. I was done. I wanted to go, and I said as much. And that's when Lee saw his opening and pounced. He'd definitely been working up a good head of steam since the bathroom, so he laid into me. So I was chickening out before we'd gone through the whole house. He finished it all off by saying, "I bet you're just gonna run crying to mommy and run straight into a cop and get us all in trouble. All 'cause you were too chicken to go into a room." You ever been so angry that you felt like your skin was on fire? Like you wanted to cry and scream and roar, but your mind couldn't decide on which one. I stood there for what felt like a minute, literally shaking with rage. I pushed the fear and uneasiness aside, made me feel like I'd just eaten all my Halloween candy in one go. Lee, to his credit, realized that he'd gone too far and wisely started running. He got out of the room and tried to go down the hall to the stairs, but I cut him off, so he ran back down the hall to the last room. I caught up to him before he could get any further, grabbed him by the hair and started laying into him, wood groaning, things crunching under our feet. And I didn't even think to look where we were going until we'd tripped and fallen. 1 second I'm cutting through the air. The next, I'm among brittle things, crunchy, brittle, cold things that break under me and rip through my clothes and shred my skin. Something goes through my arm while my hand goes straight into something cold and mushy. I let out this disgusting squawk and push Lee away so I can get to my feet. I brace myself on the floor and my other hand hits something fuzzy and cold, and that's when I notice the smell. This horrible, sour, sweet smell that burrows into my nose. I dropped my flashlight earlier, but Lee hadn't. I didn't want to see. I already knew what I was lying in. Hot summers spent near highways and in culverts, and owning 4 mutts with black holes for stomachs had acquainted me with the smell and the feel of roadkill. The light came on before I could get up and tell him to stop. They were everywhere, birds and mice, cats. Mostly, though, I saw a few dogs and maybe an elk, too. All rotting and melting into a knee-high swamp of mold and sewage, basically. I saw the flashlight beam glinting on a dozen wide, dead black eyes, the off-white of teeth and fangs, the crayon drawings on the wall, the gnawed-up, well-used toys dotted about, and all the filth like little islands, and then the massive hole in the far wall that went from floor to ceiling. The smell wouldn't let up. There was something behind the rot, something like petrichor, flesh, raw meat. I bent over to try and keep myself from throwing up, but when I did, I saw something lying on top of the mess, stuck to it with biofilm. It was a Polaroid. A Polaroid of an old wooden floor without any dust, some joists with little wisps of fiberglass still sticking to them, and a green ball gripped by 5 fat white fingers, each ending in a black hook. That's when I understood. I thought it would have been fun. Our spooky little quest, just something to do in a town that had started to bore us. You don't really know that a horror story is real until you're in the middle of one. The feeling that came with that realization was awful, obviously. It felt like I'd been walking across a road, my feet firmly on stable ground, and then bam! I'd stepped out into open air. I stood up feeling like the world was tilted on its side, hands sticky with green rot and fur and maggots. I turned to scream or call out to tell Lee and Grady that we needed to get out of there right now. And then down the hall I heard my brother start to scream. It was an awful sound, high-pitched, throat-splitting, helpless. He'd broken an arm once because I'd pushed him out of a tree that I dared him to climb. I'd scared him hundreds of times in October and out of it, and I'd let my roughhousing get out of control more than once, and he'd never made a sound even a little like that. It went on and on. Something fell with a crash that I heard him start to run, then stop just as quickly. And then there wasn't anything. No more screaming, no more crashing, just Lee's crying and my own heartbeat. I knew we'd have to get out of there. The hole in the wall was behind me. I could feel it at my back waiting. I think that's what got me to move, that kind of nebulous image of something shooting out of the darkness and pulling me down into the rot and then dragging me away. There wasn't much real planning on my part. All I knew was that I needed to get my brother and run. I imagined taking the stairs 3 at a time, dragging the boys by their arms, bursting through the front door, running out into the night from whatever lumbering ghoul was chasing us. I hauled Lee up and threw him onto solid ground, and then I got out, feeling maggots dying under my fingernails. We went to the door, threw it open, and stepped out into the darkness with only Lee's shaky little pocket of light to see by. I heard Grady before I saw him, and I didn't have the time to even finish thinking. I don't want to see him. Before he crawled out into the light. Every breath he took was wet, and his hands were red. What it had done to his face, God, I don't know how he could have seen us or heard us. I can't imagine how painful it must have been. He reached out to me, my little brother, the person I'd bullied and comforted and held as a baby and promised my parents I would care for, gagging on his own blood. Now, I couldn't move. I couldn't scream. His hand fell. It was like watching in slow motion, and that's when I noticed the things on his back. 5 or 6 of them, maybe more. I was too shocked. They were too fast, but I caught a glimpse of red and white skin, lumpy heads with big, wet mouths, fast little hands with long, long fingers like dental tools. They all fell off Grady when the light hit them, but I saw them, scurrying around him where the light didn't reach, brushing at his clothes, tugging at his legs, making tiny, quiet little suckling sounds. Lee screamed, and maybe I did too. I can't remember. I was just standing there, feeling like I was watching everything happen to someone else, and then the light was gone. Lee had turned around to run, which was stupid. There weren't any other rooms. The only window there was boarded up. It didn't even matter. He hadn't even taken 2 steps before something came out of the room that we had just been in. You've never seen a monster, a real one. It's been 2 decades, And I still haven't fully found a way to explain how seeing that thing come swaying into the light from out of the darkness felt. What it did to me. It was brain-searing. It was like being in free fall. It was like seeing something impossible and knowing it wasn't. It made my bladder give, my bowels burst. It made me choke on bile and the scream that still wouldn't come. Imagine legs with no feet. Imagine red flesh on a body like a honeycomb for vulture bees. Imagine a mother spider with her body boiling with her babies, all jostling each other, rippling, going still like lake water. Imagine a big, swollen white head, all dusty and soft like rotting bread dough. Imagine that somebody tried to sculpt a baby's face onto it. Now, imagine it looking down at you and cooing at you with a baby's happy little voice. That's what it was. And it was worse than any accident you could see, any sickness you could treat or wound you could suture. Seeing it cost me so much. My health for a good 10 years, my sobriety for nearly as long, my willingness to even be around children for longer than absolutely necessary. None of my family knows, though I bet plenty of the old-timers in town do. Aside from you, the only people I've actually told were some friends at a college party when I was drunk and high out of my mind, and Miss Newman. She was the one who found me, choking on my tears and snots, stinking like dead things and waste. She'd been coming up the trail with the officer we'd snuck past. She yelled something when she saw me and Lee racing down. Then I heard her gasp as we got closer and she could smell us and see us. For me, there's nothing between hearing the baby's happy little voice coming out of that thing and feeling the night wind clawing at my cheeks. Mrs. Newman caught me when I fell. She didn't shake me or yell at me. She spoke to me. Even though I couldn't hear anything, all I could hear was my brother's dead. My brother's dead, over and over on a loop. I must have told him about Grady, or Lee did. I can't remember. I passed out pretty soon after. My little adventure was the talk of the town. I must have told him about Grady or Lee did. I can't remember. I passed out pretty soon after. My little adventure was the talk of the town. I made the paper a few times. Got talked to and yelled at by the police and my parents. Lee's dad came by and watched me for a while before he left. I barely talked to any of them. I spent a week in the hospital. And then the remainder of that summer, sitting in my bed doing nothing. I just sat in my bed with my blankets wrapped around me, staring off at my TV or wall, not seeing anything but what happened that night. I barely moved. Sleeping until my body gave out or my parents made me take a sleeping pill. I didn't talk either. But I did have my brother's satchel. I'd forgotten that I'd taken it with me when I'd run, but I had. And it wasn't long before someone found them. I'm sure some people here have told you some stories about me, but I'm also sure there aren't many who think that it was me who killed Grady. And those pictures are why. I kept them. Despite the smell and what they show and the fact that I can't even look at the filing cabinet they're in without it all coming back, I won't throw them out. They're Grady's pictures. And I can't just throw them away just because they make me feel bad. They stay there. But you can take pictures of them or make copies of them with the originals. The originals stay with me. They burned the house down. It took people a few years to actually do it. I remember one of my friends who's a firefighter told me the night they all went up there, ready to torch it. Took them an hour to actually do it because he and his friends were certain down to their souls that the place wouldn't catch fire if they tried. They ended up having to leave. Some of them had fevers and headaches afterward. That's how it went for 6 more nights across 4 months. It was just before we were expected to get a huge snowfall when a group of them just decided to get sloshed and do it anyway. I'm told the place went up like a grease fire. Just kept burning even after the last of the supports turned to ash. I go up there sometimes, during the day. The air is just one big black pit. I haven't seen anything grow there, and it's been more than a decade. And before you ask, and I can see you gearing up too. I don't know. I don't know if those things are dead. You wanted to know what I thought had happened to the McKennas? I think Sandra wanted children so bad that she and her husband turned to alchemy to fight their problems. And those things that I saw that night, they were the result. And yeah, I have some sympathy for her. She was clearly very mentally ill. And the way she died was horrific. But I mean, she could have adopted. Brought a kid into their lives that way. Instead, she and her husband, they cost my brother his life. I'll never get the chance to apologize for everything I did. For leaving him behind. He wouldn't have made it, but I should have done more. Instead of stepping on him on the way out. I hope he's okay. Wherever he is. Hey there kids, it's me, MrCreepyPasta, and I just wanted to tell you thank you so much for watching. Welcome into October for this year, and if you like tonight's story from Isaac Bossino, please check out the link to his Etsy shop. Not only is he a writer, but he also creates some pretty incredible horror statues and creations, and if you're interested in anything like that, please take a look. Also, I want to give a huge thank you to everybody on this list of Patreons. Some of these amazing folks are Diana Kraus, AcidSystem, Blake Rattler, Brandon Mendoza, Brenna Crow, Caltuna, ChicagoHitman, CoryxKenshin, CrusaderChocobo, Dakota Best, Daniel Poulsen, Dante Kinkade, Enchanted Buns, Estebean, Hades' Nephew, himbojerry, Our Minute Seconds Time, Ingegerd Solstrom, Jay Kearns, Jadis Pet, McMog, Mr. Marcus Blitz, Psychomel, Plant Piz, Red Shadow Cat, Remember the Sun, Salty Surprise, Samara Lynn, Seclude, Simba's Bloody Mojo, Sky Harbor, Smiley the Psychotic, Sully Man, Tully Sue, Team Leo 76, The Demented Voice in Your Head, The Chavez Brothers, The Ginger Bros, Tommy Walters, Viceroy Scorn, William Wellington, Your Bro Keegan, Zabub, and Shadow Gardens. A huge thank you to you guys, everybody who shows up in the description down below, and as always folks, sweet dreams.